It was not gold that drove Phineas Whitlock west, but the scent of freshly turned earth and the promise of a life unburdened by debt. In the late spring of 1850, as he stood at the edge of the Stanislaus River, a place where the water ran clear and the hills shimmered with wildflowers, he swore he could taste freedom on the breeze. He had heard the stories back in Vermont, tales of streams so rich with gold they ran yellow, of nuggets as big as a man's fist just waiting to be picked up. He imagined a landscape of easy fortune, a gentle Arcadia where labor was rewarded tenfold. The reality was a harsh teacher. The land was beautiful, yes, but unforgiving. The sun beat down with a relentless fury that cracked the soil and parched the throat, and the nights descended with a cold that seeped into a man's very bones. The air, thick with the scent of pine and sagebrush, was also heavy with the unspoken desperation of 1,000 men, all chasing the same fleeting dream. Back in Vermont, the dirt had been stubborn and the harvest meager. Here, they said, the soil was flecked with fortune, and all a man needed was a pan, a shovel, and a strong back. He had arrived with all three, his pockets holding only dust and the weight of his family's hopes, a burden heavier than any earthly possession. He had written to his wife, Sarah, promising to return with enough to buy a proper farm, a field that wasn't choked with stones and a roof that didn't leak with every spring rain. The first month was a blur of backbreaking labor and aching disappointment. Phineas panned from dawn until dusk, his hands raw and blistered, his clothes caked in a fine golden-brown silt. The days melted into a monotonous cycle of scooping, sifting, and shaking, the constant murmur of the water in his ears the only soundtrack to his growing despair. He learned to read the river's currents, to spot the sandbars where gold might settle, and to listen to the whispers of the veteran prospectors. "Look for the black sand, son," an old-timer with a beard like a gray waterfall had advised, his voice a gravelly echo of 1,000 failed dreams. But no matter how hard he looked, the black sand yielded only gravel and pyrite, the fool's gold that winked mockingly in the sun. The freedom he had smelled upon arrival now felt like a mirage, a cruel trick of the heat, and the weight of his family's hopes had become a stone around his neck, dragging him deeper into a mire of failure. Discouragement, as a fellow prospector once told him, was a disease, and Phineas was starting to feel its effects in his very bones. He was hungry, tired, and losing faith, not just in his luck, but in the fundamental fairness of the world. He saw men who seemed to do nothing more than lean against a tree and smoke, only to stumble upon a nugget as big as a thumbnail. One sweltering afternoon, as he slumped against a sycamore tree, the sap sticky on his back, he watched a young man named Silas, barely 20, pull a shimmering nugget from a crevice just 10 feet from where Phineas had been panning all morning. The sight of it, heavy and brilliant, was like a physical blow. Phineas's exhaustion turned to a bitter, burning envy, a venomous heat that soured his stomach and tightened his chest. The good, honest man from Vermont began to see the world differently. He realized that luck was not a partner in this enterprise. It was an enemy. A man had to outsmart it, out-hustle it, and maybe, just maybe, steal it if he had to. The image of Sarah's patient, hopeful face in his mind twisted into a new justification. This wasn't about greed, it was about providing, about fulfilling a sacred promise. His shift in perspective led him away from the crowded riverbanks and up into the canyons, where the air was thinner and the desperation felt more private. He started to watch others, not for tips on where to pan, but for weaknesses. He became a ghost in the camp, a quiet observer of human frailty. He learned where men hid their stashes, what their habits were, and how easily a desperate man could be tempted. He saw the gleam of avarice in others' eyes, and it made his own transgression seem less monstrous. One night he saw a man named Jebediah, a lonely old miner who spoke to his tools as if they were his children, hide a small pouch beneath a loose rock at the base of his tent. The pouch was heavy with the unmistakable weight of gold, the telltale rattle and clink of flakes and nuggets. A new hunger, colder and sharper than the one for food, took root in Phineas. He knew what he had to do. He waited until the moon was just a sliver of white in the sky, a pale sliver of a memory of what a clear conscience felt like. The crickets chirped a maddening rhythm, and the distant howl of a coyote was a sound he interpreted as both warning and mockery. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum as he crept through the sleeping camp, his boots a whisper of leather on the dry earth. The air was thick with the smells of pine, sweat, and the unwashed canvas of 100 tents. He felt for Jebediah's tent flap, the canvas cool and damp to the touch, and found the loose rock. The stone was smooth beneath his fingers, a sentinel to the treasure it concealed. With trembling hands he retrieved the heavy pouch. It was full. He fled back to his own camp, the pouch a hot coal in his hands, its weight both a comfort and a curse. The next morning the camp was in an uproar. A furious, heartbroken shout went up, and soon a crowd gathered around Jebediah's tent. Jebediah was weeping, his face a mask of crumpled grief, cursing his luck and threatening vengeance on whoever had stolen his claim. The sound of his sobs echoed in the clear morning air, a sound Phineas would carry with him for years to come. Phineas felt a pang of guilt, a sharp stab of remorse, but it was quickly buried under the triumph of a full pouch and the promise of a ticket home. He decided to leave that very morning before suspicion could fall on him. He packed his meager belongings, his movements quick and furtive, a man trying to outrun his own shadow. As he slung his pack over his shoulder, his eyes were drawn to Jebediah, who was still searching fruitlessly under his tent flap, his hands scrabbling at the ground like a frightened animal. The old man looked up, his gaze meeting Phineas's, and for a fleeting moment a profound, sickening shame washed over him. The gold in the pouch so precious moments ago now felt like a handful of tarnished pennies. The promise of freedom was gone, replaced by a new burden, heavier and more permanent than any debt. It was the weight of a conscience stained with a dust he could never wash off. He left the camp under the thin pretext of seeking a new claim upriver, his head down, his shoulders hunched against the phantom accusations he felt on his back. The Stanislaus River, once a symbol of hope, now seemed to mock his retreat, its clear water reflecting a face he no longer recognized. He walked for days, each step a further entanglement in the web of his own deceit. The gold pouch, tied to his belt, swung with a rhythmic weight against his hip, a constant, sickening reminder of what he had done. He couldn't bring himself to look at it, to feel its smooth, cold surface. It felt less like a treasure and more like a tumor, a physical manifestation of his moral decay. He found no solace in the sprawling beauty of the Sierra Nevada foothills. The redwoods stood like silent, towering judges, and the sun, so golden and pure, felt like a spotlight on his sin. He eventually found his way to a tiny, isolated settlement known as Cedar Creek, a ramshackle collection of 5 tents and a dilapidated saloon. It was a place where prospectors came to lick their wounds and escape the frenetic, feverish greed of the larger camps. Here he kept to himself, panning in a quiet tributary, though his heart was never in it. The gold he found, tiny flakes and specks, seemed insignificant and hollow. He couldn't bring himself to touch the stolen pouch, to use Jebediah's life savings. It sat, unopened, at the bottom of his bedroll, a monument to his downfall. The guilt became a living thing, a shadow that followed him, a voice that whispered in the wind. He couldn't sleep. Every rustle of a leaf sounded like Jebediah's tent flap, every distant shout like an accusation. He began to waste away, the hard-earned muscle and sinew of his Vermonter youth giving way to a gaunt, haunted frame. His eyes became sunken, his beard unkempt, and the hopeful glint that had once animated his face was replaced by a constant, weary watchfulness. He was living a paradox. He had the gold, the very thing he came for, but it had made him poorer than he had ever been. One afternoon, as he sat hunched over a meager fire, his mind a swirl of self-recrimination, he heard a new voice in the camp. It was a man, old and frail, asking around for news of a fellow miner, a man named Phineas Whitlock. Phineas's blood ran cold. He scrambled behind his tent, his heart hammering against his ribs. The voice was familiar. It was Jebediah. He was here at Cedar Creek. Phineas waited, a statue of fear and shame, until he heard the footsteps pass. He peered around the corner of his tent and saw Jebediah standing by the creek, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The old man looked even more withered than he had a week ago. His clothes were ragged, and the weary sag in his shoulders suggested a burden far greater than simple exhaustion. Phineas felt a wave of nausea. He had to face him. He had to. He walked slowly, his legs feeling like lead weights, until he was standing a few feet from the old man. "Jebediah." Phineas's voice was a dry, reedy croak. The old man turned, his eyes hollow and empty. "That's me," he said, his voice a tired sigh. "I'm looking for a fella said his name was Phineas. Fellow from Vermont, I think. He was at the Stanislaus camp. You know him." "Fiend." Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.